Welcome to the Peachtree Podcast. Peachtree Learning Center is a nonprofit in Middle Tennessee dedicated to training and discipling students in all the fine arts to become excellent and skilled in order to spread the kingdom of God into the world of the arts. On this podcast, we will discuss topics designed to encourage, uplift, educate, and equip people to proclaim the kingdom more deeply in their own families and communities. Okay, we have built covered some fun topics. I wanted to mention something about the. We talked a lot years ago when I was first coming around. We talked a lot about process, and that's a big component of what Peachtree is about, is teaching children the value of process and not just product. Because I think we do live in an environment, especially I think since the industrial age started, of focusing on product and what we can make or what the end product of something is or what's the goal of that. And we've neglected the whole piece of creative, especially creative pursuits, that is the process itself. And you are great about explaining the value of process and what happens to our brains and what happens to our lives when we free ourselves to allow process to have its work. Mm-hmm. So can you speak to that a little bit? It's a slightly different topic, but
yeah, it is.
It's a component.
Important. Because that does not avoid excellence.
Right. Because excellence is also one of our stated goals.
But and it is.
Yes. Yes, we don't want it to be done halfway.
It's excellence with grace.
Yes.
When you embrace process, mm-hmm. you still have the goal of excellence, but there's a grace that isn't there if your only emphasis is excellence.
Right.
And there's a pressure that's lifted from children and a freedom to explore that's given to them. Mm-hmm. And, I have a personal testimony of that. When I was in school, I was just, pushed like most of my generation into college prep courses and, checking off the list. You did that. So by my senior year in high school, I had done I had all my credits. I've taken all my classes, and I helped the assistant principal at my school. And he said to me, why don't you try an art class? And I was kind of like, really? And I tried an art class, and it was a beautifully equipped wing of the school that I had never been in.
Wow. And
this is what really, I had an awakening. Mm-hmm. I worked with clay. I actually made some mugs that my family used. From scratch, from kneading the clay and the process. And yes. It was hand building, not on a wheel, so it was even more personal. And glazing and, using that. And then, I really had a grief that I had missed that. And I carried that. And then when I was in my first year of college, I actually was a reading tutor in an elementary school, and I was accountable to this certain woman, and I would turn in my report every week, and I went into her office, and she said she had this stack of hand-woven textiles on her table, and I said, "What's that?" And she said, "Oh, I'm going to a Weavers Guild meeting this evening, and those are textiles from the southern states. They're coverlets, and our guild has been decoding what patterns those coverlets have come from."
Wow.
And I said, "Where were they made?" And she said, "Mostly Tennessee." And I was captured, and they were so beautiful. And I said, "You mean someone made these from scratch?" And she said, "Oh, they probably made the yarn first, and then dyed them and then wove the coverlets.
Wow.
And I just said, "Can I go to that meeting with you?" And seriously, from that point on, I took weekend workshops. I visited Weavers Guilds. I went to conventions. I literally developed my own curriculum to learn this process. And it, I went to things that were called From Sheep to Shawl, where we would actually, card, do the entire process of carding the wool, to spinning the wool, to natural dyeing the wool, to weaving a shawl. Linen. I went to a conference in the northern Midwest that the linen was grown, and we learned how to break down the linen into fiber that could be spun into linen thread, and then made appropriate things with that. When Steve and I moved to Tennessee, I met a group of women in Nashville that were doing exactly what the supervisor of mine was doing. They were decoding coverlets. It was a group of women in Nashville that were decoding coverlets so that they could be reproduced by hand weavers, because they were just indigenous to Tennessee.
This area.
And
Wow.
and so following that process, I honestly felt like I had an awakening. I began.
You found part of your calling.
It was a preparation for this,
Yes.
but it made me much more interested in learning, and it gave me a different view when I would look at things. I wouldn't look at them and expect things to be fast.
Right.
We've all talked about our
Yes.
instant society and
Yes.
how important it is to experience process from the beginning to the end, and understand. Well, it's part of that due diligence. There's
Yes.
due diligence in that,
Yes.
and so
Just the value that comes from making your brain go slowly and thoughtfully through a specific process. I feel like we've even right now see a disservice being done in giving, I'm guilty of this too, finding abridged versions of classic books. I feel like it might have even gone back to my days with Cliff Notes in high school. I did Cliff Note versions of classic books. I didn't go and read the book. And so I could take a test on a book because I read the Cliff Note version. And I would claim that I read the book. I no more read the book than if I'd, seen a poster about it. And I feel like that's only gotten worse as the microwave version of society has encroached. And we've forgotten how to go back and pick up a good book and just read the entire book, start to finish. Or we want to see the movie version because it's the Cliff Note version visually, so we don't even have to apply ourselves to read. And there's a lot of value in stepping back with your family, and letting your children have the frustration and then developing the perseverance to just stick with something till you've made something out of it.
Yes.
You've made something happen out of it. I also think there's quite a few verses of scripture that speak to blessing the work of our hands, or using your hands in your living, or living a quiet life and working with your hands. And I think those verses didn't strike me till I was an adult and had children and started reading certain scriptures and seeing those words jump out differently to me, and realizing crafts. We always had crafts going somewhere in our house because there was some idea of working with our hands. And I mean, one of my daughters ended up being more of an artist than the other, but the other's a musician, and it's still the idea of working with her hands. And that was such an important part of who they were supposed to be, and I had no idea. We just did crafts because I saw those verses and thought, oh, we need to make our food from scratch, and we need to
yes,
not just always pick up a cake mix, but go back and pick up the flour and the leavening and the eggs and crack it all together in the bowl, and not just a 3-ingredient, but a 15-ingredient cake. And
right.
then you really understand a carrot cake if you've grated the carrots into the dough. You feel it differently, and you're also more proud of it. Honestly,
Yes, you're more
if you've
invested.
done it yourself, and that's a great lesson to tuck away into children's hats. I love watching them come down at the end of the semester or the end of the year with their portfolio of all the work they've done, and so proudly presenting it to a parent who's come to pick them up that last day. this is all my work and I did it all myself with my hands.
Yes,
Or
yes.
the spring show, getting to see
So
all the classes
important.
perform, and they're so excited to share what they've learned and how they've been trained, and seeing them applauded for sticking with the process. And not that the goal is the product, but the goal has been achieved because of the process and being honoring to the process.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And it also, it takes courage.
It
There's
does.
so many aspects
That's true.
that process develops within our character.
Yes.
It takes courage to do the things that we do
Yes.
at Peachtree,
Yes.
because you're putting yourself
Yes. You're
out
vulnerable
there,
in a
and you're vulnerable.
totally different way. Mm-hmm. Yes.
And then, you have to determine that you accept the outcome, because
Right.
sometimes we fail,
Yes.
and you have to understand sometimes that piece of art, it just didn't happen.
Right.
Or sometimes at the music recital,
I didn't play it the way I wanted
you
to.
didn't do it well,
Right.
or you feel like you didn't do it
Right.
well. It's all a circle story, isn't it?
It is. Mm-hmm.
And if we can teach our children to do things unto the Lord
Yes.
and not for your own personal ego,
Right.
then it puts everything in such a different perspective.
And the other piece that comes to my mind that we leave out in doing that is we leave out the competitiveness with other students. And that's another component of Peachtree I've always admired, is that in a world where everything's about clawing your way to the top, it's never been about that here. It's been about doing your personal best to bring excellence before the Lord as an offering. And the way that is structured into every class
Very
is
important.
beautiful. And we do have people go to competitions and win, and we do have people enter and win honors at All-State and Mid-State Choir and in vocal challenges and in instrumental places. We have people in all those spaces, but it's never about, I want to excel and beat my other student, my friend student who's in my class with me. We've never had that introduced as even a concept. And I absolutely love that. I covet that for other people, because this world is definitely, we're in a society that's all about beating out your fellow man. And here it's about coming together and each of us doing our best and offering it singly, but also collectively.
Absolutely.
So nobody has to be held back or pushed forward. Everybody does their own best, even in group classes. It's a beautiful thing and very unique in this time. So, and I do feel like that's one thing God wants us to uphold, is the idea of everyone doing their best and that being enough.
Yeah, I love this because it doesn't exempt achievement.
No, absolutely not. We are all about achievement, but in the process and to the best of your ability is plenty.
Yes, absolutely.
But it's about doing your
Very
best.
well said.
Yeah, it's your best. Yeah, that was one thing I definitely wanted to talk about, so thank you. Okay, what other things do we need to talk about? I think I'm at the end of my list of questions. Oh, we did mention, I wanted to talk about what you see. I had a question kind of framed around the concept of the parts that you've seen blossom already in Peachtree, and we talked about how it started as a one-day program, and then it moved, and then it became its own, it came into its own permanent space, and then it grew into 2 days, and then 3 days, and lately, the last few years, it's gotten to be parts of all 5 days, and suddenly it's every day, all day, and Fridays were usually done by about 3. and so it's definitely grown in that way, but there are other aspects of the vision I think you've seen that are still to come. One I wanted to specifically mention was the idea of using Peachtree's principles as an outreach tool and being able to take that into other places. And you touched on that idea being planted back with your trips to the Ukraine. But speak to that as well. Like, that's still something we've held in prayer before the Lord about, just taking seeds he's planted here and going and using them to bless other places, perhaps with missional ideas. I might have just said it all.
You did.
I know we've had that conversation several times, and that's an opportunity I still feel like is part of what he's doing here, but it's kind of still in the future in some ways. It's coming.
And he will build community that way. When it's the time.
Yes.
There will be people that carry that
Yes.
in their heart, and possibly families.
Right.
The difficult thing is you can't franchise Peachtree.
No. It's also a beautiful thing.
You know, I've known several people that have done pieces of Peachtree for a very short time. You know, maybe 2 years, 3 years at the most, in different locations. And you know, Peachtree is sustained because it's the Lord's.
Right.
And so when he determines Judea is sufficient, he's Samaria to the ends of the earth.
Right.
When he determines that it's time to expand, and it's in the heart of those that will be carrying it, that will happen.
Well, and some of the fruits I see already in that area too. It's a really fun thing to be at a concert, especially in the spring when we have all the age ranges there, and to just ask people to stand up who used to be students at Peachtree, who now have students at Peachtree, or teachers. We have a lot of teachers here who are alumni of Peachtree, who wanted to come back and be part of the community after they left as students. And that's a beautiful generational transfer. I've loved watching that.
Oh, it certainly is.
We're hoping to have a little bit of a reunion moment at our Christmas show with some alumni who have expressed interest in coming back together for a specific thing. And that it's just beautiful to me that they do carry that. And that's always a warm spot for most students when they leave here. Is I have this warm spot of I knew the Lord in a special way while I was in those classes. And it wasn't just me learning to draw, but it was me learning to see the heart of the Lord in that.
Yes.
Or I wasn't just in choir, but I experienced community from the throne of God because I was in choir, and we spoke about that and we prayed over that, and then we sang songs that lifted that up. And he inhabited the praises of his people while we were in that room. Yes. Those are the seeds you're talking about taking with them.
Yes. And I mentioned that I personally was not homeschooled, but I did homeschool my 2 daughters, and they are homeschooling, and they have children at Peachtree. They each have 3, and all but the baby are in classes at Peachtree. And it's a very tender, you know, not just because of my involvement, but their personal experience in the classes at Peachtree are very tender for them and very esteemed, and they want that for their children. So you're absolutely right. And going, you know, carrying it, you know, it will take families that have that in their heart for their family.
Right.
And, you know, God will do that.
He is doing that.
In the timing.
Yes. Yeah, we talk a lot at faculty meetings. We have a couple a year, and this year we focused a lot on, we had two main thrusts, but one of them was just being able to love students in your classroom through whatever it is you're teaching, remembering that the main goal is to tuck a loving hour into their jacket before they leave the building, you know, understanding that they were loved well, whatever that looks like. Sometimes it's contrary to what they wanted at the time, but when they reflect on that, knowing that it was actually out of love, that the things that motivate us as teachers have to be rooted in the love of God, and that is something that will take them a lot of places. And we do have children who come in with hard stories or hard circumstances, and if they can leave here knowing they were loved and cherished for a little while they were creative, it's a beautiful gift. I think we've covered most of the topics. Oh yes, we were going to talk about the transition that you made out of being director, because that was it was scary for me for you to decide not to be director. But I was here as a board member for a while, and I was here as a parent first. I brought my daughter for an art class. Oh my goodness, 11 years ago, 2011, I think, which I didn't realize was early in the Peachtree entity life, but it was. We came for an art class with Miss Bobby. She learned, and she also had a class in paper and bookmaking. We still have the books she made because she learned 5 or 6 different ways to bind books, and she still makes those. Yes. And then she painted with Miss Bobby, and I started talking to you in the lobby and ended up here teaching music classes, and you asked Sarah to come teach violin while she was in high school, and it's kind of mushroomed from that. But there was a point at which, I think it was 2017, 18, when you decided that the time was right for you to not be director. So what led you to that?
Well, I was approaching retirement age, And as anyone that would be in my position, I had been asking the Lord, okay, Lord, who is your next steward? Who will carry this for you? And through the years that followed, there were a couple different times that I'd heard your name, and just kind of smiled, like, no, I don't know her. And then the year that you came, I was like, oh, you're Tabitha Merritt. And I did. I found your daughters to be absolutely delightful, and loved the investment that I could see that you and David had made into them and into their education and their life experience. It's absolutely outstanding. So yes, each of you, we needed someone to help Jennifer in the music classes, and of course you are a very accomplished pianist, and so you were able to fill that for Jennifer. And your daughters just found their place. And we say our gifts make room for themselves, and they did. And so that in itself was something that I noticed. And as I continued to get to know you, and as we continued to have conversations like we are today, I began asking the Lord, what is your plan for them? Then I just put myself in a position that I listened more, and listened to you and listened to your heart, and realized how aligned we were. And then my husband was getting ready, close to retirement. My daughters, I had 6 little grandchildren, young grandchildren, well, 5. And then Elizabeth and Christian were preparing to go to South Korea to adopt their son. And there were just a lot of needs that I wanted to be there for.
Right.
And I didn't want to miss as a grandma.
Right, absolutely.
And so I started having conversation with you, and I could just see that this was God's plan, and just loved it's the relational vine that God works through, and this wasn't a stranger that was going to be at the helm of stewarding Peachtree. It was a very, very good friend.
Well,
and I've enjoyed your friendship,
absolutely.
and your daughter's friendship. And so I'm ready, and I still am. I am ready for what's to come, because you carry more than I had to give. And you have peace. God's equipped you with pieces that have already contributed beyond what I would bring.
Well, I've seen
And
him
that's
definitely
what God-
not waste a thing.
No, and so He's been preparing you for this for years.
Isn't that sweet?
And when you say, what do I see for the future? I see nothing but good. And I know we'll have surprises, because that's how God is.
It's true.
But he will have answers to the things that are difficult, and He will have a support system for where
Yes.
you lead.
Yes. Well, thank you.
And you're an excellent leader.
That means a lot, Shani.
I
Thank you.
couldn't
It's very
be
sweet.
more honored with God's choice, and that was you.
Thank you. I remember saying the same thing to you that you said to Mr. Marquise when he came and asked you. I looked at you and said, "No, I can't do that. There's no way."
And we can't.
No,
On our
exactly. That's
own.
the right place to start. It's true. But I remember going home and thinking about it, and the business background I had, but also the musical background, kind of came together in that space. And I had just graduated my second daughter, so I didn't have any huge agenda
No,
going on.
God's
And it was
timing is
the
perfect.
perfect time. So
Yeah.
when our family gathered around and talked about it, it was kind of why wouldn't you do that? Well, I don't know. I don't really have any big reasons why not, but I need good reasons too. And then just in prayer, being completely assured that he was going to be there and take care of it. If I would just remember that it was his, which it is. So
Yes.
and that's the verse that I told you earlier has been in my mind a lot the last couple of weeks. The verse that he gave me then was, trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths. So I feel that very strongly, that if we continue to acknowledge he's here in his presence and his blessing, he will inhabit the praises of his people, and he will direct our paths. So
Yes,
I get
absolutely.
excited looking forward to and seeing. There are some big surprises we'll be announcing in the next couple of months as to what we think he's doing here. But
Yes.
It's an exciting season for sure.
It certainly is.
Yeah, it's very sweet.
And it will always grow.
Yeah.
And he will always be working all things to the good on our behalf.
Amen. Yes, he does. He absolutely does that. Thank you. Thank you for
Well,
inaugurating
thank
our
you.
podcast. We've got a lot of good things talked about. Thank you so much for being here and helping
Thank
us get
you.
it started well. And
I look forward to
giving our-
hearing all the podcasts.
Well, this is a great way to let the community, which now has a lot of people that don't know the story, involved to get them up to speed as to how we got to where we are now. And it was not an accident or a planned event. It was a process that we were just talking about. It's been a 30-year process, but it's a beautiful thing to see.
Yes.
So thank you. Thank you for sharing all that.
Thank you, Tabitha.
Thank you so much for joining us today. To support this podcast, please go follow us on your podcast platform of choice. And if you're interested in knowing more about the work of Peachtree, please go visit our website at peachtreelearningcenter.com for more information.